Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We ask the clerk to report Senate Committee Substitute 1.
Clerk, please report.
Senate Committee Substitute 1 to House Bill 8.
Gentleman from Todd.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we concur with Senate Committee Substitute 1.
Motion is that the House does concur with Senate Committee Substitute 1. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, those in favor signify by voting aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. House does concur with Senate Committee Substitute 1. Gentleman from Todd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have discussed House Bill 8 on the floor before, and I will make this a little more truncated, I hope. There are basic components to the bill as relieved back from the Senate. First, there is a component dealing with an individual income tax rate reduction, and I'll get into that in a moment. There is an expansion, a modest expansion of the sales tax base. There were at least 3 things removed in the Senate Committee sub of interest to people. Personal financial services was removed. Travel, arrangement, and reservation services were removed. And pleasure watercraft docking, launching, and storage services were removed. I think all other measures remained in on the base expansion. Also, the issue of car and ride sharing remains in. Transient room tax to help with the locals, no impact to the state budget, remains in. Electric powered vehicle taxes remain in. Tax amnesty remains in. There is a manufactured home inventory tax that relieves a few places of that local tax at the state level and the local tax. And there's a decontamination tax, sometimes referred to as a credit for brown fields. As to the adjustment of the individual income tax rate, we had discussion on the floor about using absolute numbers. If you'll recall, triggers, if we hit a revenue level, there would be a trigger. So if you have $1 billion up, you would go $500 million down for a 0.5 point reduction of the individual income tax rate. This has been rendered to a formula at this point, and I think it's a good budgeting measure going forward, not just for the purpose of tax, but for our budgeting. Essentially does this, requires that our budget reserve trust fund stay at a healthy percentage level compared to the general fund. It makes sure that when we close out a fiscal year, we have at least $1 billion over our appropriations, $1 billion in revenue over, so that we can afford to go down that 0.5 point. It also requires that we maintain the budget appropriations at a certain level in response or in relation to actual revenues and actual appropriations. So at the close of the year, we're not using theoretical numbers, we're using in fact numbers. What would happen is essentially this: applying the formula at the close of a fiscal year, if the triggers are met and the guards are safe, then the Department of Revenue will look at and determine whether a 0.5 point reduction would apply in the second successive January after the close of that year. Unlike the prior version, it was the first January following. This time it'll be the second successive January following is the earliest it could go into effect. This method and formula is being applied as of the close of 2021. So June 2021, and if the triggers and guards remain in effect, which we anticipate that they will on the factual numbers, there would be a 0.5 point reduction of the individual income tax rate that would apply in January of 23. Every reduction that becomes possible thereafter of the individual income tax rate would require, in the intervening session, the first January following the close, when a rate reduction is probable or initiated by DOR, then the General Assembly would have to take an affirmative act in order to make sure that next reduction occurred. That is another safeguard to make sure that if everything went awry in a short amount of time, the General Assembly would at least have an opportunity to respond and take appropriate action. Car and ride sales, on the sales tax base, as I said, it's a modest expansion, certain things being removed. Car and ride sharing, again, it's the service itself, 6% across. Transit room tax, helping at the local. I do want to speak to the electric powered vehicle tax. There are 2 portions of that. One is on the charging activity for any publicly accessible charging action. And secondly, there is an ownership fee for electric vehicles in the rate of $120 for EVs and $60 for hybrids and for EV motorcycles. That would occur each year. Mr. Speaker, with that, I would move for final passage of House Bill 8 as amended in the Senate, concurred by the House and Senate Committee Substitute 1, and ask for final passage.